Many people are afraid to fly in small planes. They're light, fragile, and unstable in bad weather. But in Alaska, with its great stretches of raw wilderness, people depend on these planes for everyday transportation, always trusting that cautious flying will see them through. But as one man from Anchorage discovered, sometimes it takes more than caution to survive a disaster in the Alaskan outback. It began as a hunting and fishing adventure. Scott Weber and his friend pilot Gary Franklin had flown a bush plane hundreds of miles from civilization to try their luck in the wilderness. The site was so remote that the only place to land or take off was a narrow river sandbar. Bad weather had set in, and they decided to leave early. Violent and unpredictable winds meant that every pound of weight could mean the difference between life and death during takeoff. So Gary took great care in loading the plane.
Because an airplane's ability to fly depends upon how heavy the airplane is, and because this runway was so short, I decided to make the airplane as light as I possibly could.
Gary was so concerned about the plane's weight that he gave Scott a chance to stay behind, offering to ferry the equipment out first and return for him later.
I really wanted to get back home, so I told him no, I wanted to go with him. To me, it was another takeoff and landing. I trusted Gary's ability in his flying, and I took all that into consideration.
The plane lifted off normally, and for a brief moment, Gary and Scott thought they were safely airborne.
I just pulled back on the stick, and the airplane gently came up into the sky. And then all of a sudden, it just fell out of the sky and landed into the river.
As we were skidding, there was an explosion at the same time. It was just like one big jolt, but you didn't really pay attention to that because you're on fire.
As the plane ground to a halt on a rocky sandbar, the situation looked hopeless.
The flames started spreading the moment we hit the sandbar. Basically, the whole airplane was just engulfed in flames.
Pretty soon, the whole cockpit's filled with smoke, fire. It was hot. Nothing that you ever want to ever feel. If you imagine yourself burning your finger, well, times that by like 200.
Gary tumbled from the plane within seconds of landing and ran for the water. But Scott, unable to unfasten his seatbelt, fought the flames as long as he could.
I couldn't move. I was strapped in. I couldn't feel anything because my hands were being burned. I just leaned up. I was ready to die.
Suddenly, a mysterious force seemed to take physical control of Scott's body.
I felt the seatbelt break loose. I felt a pull, and it was just like somebody pulling you. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. It was just just the slightest motion, just pulling me that way.
The next thing Scott remembers, he was standing next to the plane in shock as Gary threw him to the ground to put out his flames. Finally, Gary dragged him to the river where he doused him with water. When Scott tried to thank Gary for helping him out of the plane, he found he owed his life to someone or something else.
I said, thanks for pulling me out of the plane. And he told me he didn't have nothing to do with it. He never pulled me out.
What was this mysterious force that pulled Scott Weber out of his safety belt and out of a burning plane? Could it be related to his mother's experience more than 2,000 miles away in Aberdeen, South Dakota? Donna Weber woke up with a start.
Well, it was just like a sudden bolt. My eyes just kind of popped open, and I just knew that there was trouble and that there was something wrong. And I knew it was about Scott because before that I had been dreaming about him.
Donna sensed that her son desperately needed help, but he was thousands of miles away. So Donna did the only thing she could. She looked for guidance.
So I just knelt by the side of the bed and said my prayer to protect Scott and to take care of him.
Is a son alive today because of his mother's desperate plea for help? Both men sustained burns over 50% of their bodies, yet in spite of doctors' predictions, they survived and recovered. Scott believes the answer to the mystery is a simple one.
I've always believed in miracles, and I just didn't think that one was ever going to happen to me. People say that there's guardian angels watching over them, and it just happens that mine is on the ground and lives in South Dakota.